The homeless man who returned my lost bag refused the $100 I offered him. He stood beneath the awning of a closed pharmacy, rain dripping from his beard, and held out the leather bag that contained my passport, my laptop, $6,000 in cash, and the only copy of a contract that could save my business. I asked him why he had not taken anything. He said, "Because losing yourself is expensive enough." Then he walked away before I learned his last name. 10 years later, I saw him again. He was standing at the front of a courtroom, wearing a dark suit, speaking to a judge about a woman who had stolen money from people with nowhere else to go. When he turned and recognized me, I realized the bag had never been the most important thing he returned. At the time, I was 38 and close to losing everything. My name is Laura Bennett, and I owned a small event production company in Seattle called Bennett and Lane. The Lane belonged to my former business partner, Vanessa Lane, who had left 18 months earlier after we disagreed about growth, debt, and how much dishonesty a client should be expected to tolerate. More employees, larger corporate contracts. I wanted steady work and paid invoices. She called me cautious. I called her reckless. We were both partly right. When she left, she took 2 major clients and 3 employees. She also left behind a line of credit we had personally guaranteed together. The company survived, but barely. I worked 14-hour days. I stopped taking a salary for 3 months. My marriage became another casualty. My husband, Mark, had spent years asking me to choose a life that included him. I kept saying the next quarter would be easier. Eventually, he stopped waiting. Our divorce became final 6 weeks before I lost the bag. I blamed him for leaving during crisis. Later, I understood the crisis had become my permanent excuse. The day I lost the bag, I was traveling to Portland for a meeting with Crestwell Hotels. Crestwell operated 12 boutique hotels across the Pacific Northwest and wanted one event company to manage conferences, weddings, donor dinners, and executive retreats. The contract was worth nearly $900,000 over 3 years. Not profit, revenue. Still, it could stabilize Bennett and Lane. The final proposal existed on my laptop and in one printed copy inside the leather bag. The $6,000 was a vendor payment I planned to deposit before leaving Seattle. Carrying cash was foolish. The vendor had insisted because his account was frozen during a partnership dispute. I agreed because I needed his equipment for a separate event. At the train station, I purchased coffee, answered 2 calls, and argued with an employee about rental linens. I placed the bag beside my chair. Then my train began boarding. I picked up my coat, phone, and coffee. Not the bag. I realized 20 minutes after departure. My stomach dropped. I searched beneath the seat, checked the overhead rack, called station security. They found nothing. I got off at the next stop and took a return train. By then, 2 hours had passed. The bag contained enough information to damage clients, enough cash to cause suspicion, and enough personal documents to create months of trouble. But what terrified me most was the contract. Crestwell's executive team expected printed financial schedules and insurance documents at 9 the next morning. The files were backed up, but the detailed pricing model was not. I had made final changes on the train platform and saved them locally. That was another bad habit born from exhaustion. When I returned to Seattle, rain had begun. Station security reviewed camera footage. They saw me leave the bag. Then a man in a heavy green coat picked it up. He looked around, spoke to a cleaner, and walked toward the north exit. The guard paused the image. The man had long hair, a beard, and a backpack. "He is probably from the encampment under the bridge," the guard said. The way he said it made the conclusion feel complete. I asked whether police would search. The guard said I could file a report. Cash was unlikely to return. The laptop might appear at a pawn shop. I felt sick. I walked toward the north exit without a plan. The rain became heavier. People moved quickly beneath umbrellas. Near the pharmacy, a man stepped from the shadow beneath the awning. He held my bag. For one moment, I thought he might demand money. Instead, he said, "Laura?" I froze. He had found my name on the passport. Yes. He handed me the bag. I opened it immediately. Laptop, passport, cash envelope, contract. Everything appeared present. I counted the money. All 6,000. My relief came out as suspicion. "Why did you take it?" His face changed. "I was trying to turn it in. The station said you left. The guard told me to wait outside. That embarrassed me. I had assumed the man on the camera had stolen it because everyone around me had supplied the same story. I apologized. He shrugged. I read the emergency contact card and called the number. My emergency contact was still Mark. He had not answered. The man waited near the station, hoping I would return. I offered him $100. He refused. I increased it to $200. He said, I did not return it for a fee. You could use it. The words came out badly. His eyes hardened. You do not know what I could use. I felt ashamed. I'm sorry. He looked at the leather bag. Losing yourself is expensive enough. Then he walked into the rain. I followed for half a block. Wait, what is your name? Samuel. Samuel what? He did not answer. I stood beneath a streetlight holding the bag like a rescued child. The next morning, I reached Portland. The Crestwell meeting began badly because I had barely slept. Then it improved. I spoke honestly about capacity, staffing, and what my company could manage. For once, exhaustion removed my ability to perform confidence. The executives asked hard questions. I answered directly. We won the contract. Bennett and Lane stabilized. The contract also changed the company. We hired slowly, improved backups, created clearer vendor controls. I began paying myself again. Within 2 years, revenue doubled. People later described that period as my comeback. They did not see the fear, debt, and luck beneath it. They also did not know the contract nearly disappeared with a leather bag. I thought about Samuel often during the first months. I returned to the station with food, socks, and gift cards. I asked outreach workers whether they knew a man named Samuel in a green coat. Several knew more than one. No one knew which man had returned my bag. I left a note at a shelter. Samuel, you returned a leather bag near King Street Station. I would like to thank you properly. Laura Bennett. No one responded. I told myself he preferred anonymity. That thought allowed me to stop searching. It also allowed me to avoid confronting how quickly I had treated him as a problem to solve. I had offered money because money was the language I understood under pressure. He refused because dignity was not a transaction. Life moved forward. I sold Bennett and Lane 7 years later to a regional hospitality group. The sale did not make me extraordinarily wealthy, but it gave me financial security. I remained as a consultant for 1 year, then left completely. By then, my son, Ethan, was 24. He had been 15 when Mark and I divorced. Ethan spent his teenage years watching both parents defend themselves. Mark said the business mattered more than family. I said he abandoned us when I needed support. Ethan learned not to bring either of us pain because we would turn it into evidence. As an adult, he kept distance. That became the cost of winning every argument. After selling the company, I tried to repair our relationship. I attended therapy. I apologized without explaining Mark's faults. I told Ethan, I made work in emergencies so often that you stopped believing home could need me. He said, that is true. No hug, no instant forgiveness. But he began answering more calls. I also began volunteering with a nonprofit called Harbor Steps. They provided mail services, legal aid, employment support, and transitional housing for people experiencing homelessness. I chose the organization because of Samuel. At first, that motive was self-centered. I imagined I might find him and complete the unfinished thank you. Instead, I met dozens of people whose lives did not resemble the simple story I had created around him. A former nurse evicted after medical debt, a veteran with untreated trauma, a young man aging out of foster care, a mother hiding from an abusive partner, people who made mistakes, people failed by systems, people harmed by others. Usually, some combination. I learned not to turn homelessness into a moral lesson about one honest man. Samuel had returned my bag. That did not make every homeless person noble. It made my assumption about him wrong. Harbor Steps needed board members with business experience. I joined. I helped improve donor tracking and vendor contracts. I tried not to take over. Sometimes I failed. The executive director, Nia Coleman, once told me, "You enter every messy process like it is a burning ballroom." I built a career in events. We are not an event. She was right. People's lives did not need my production schedule. 10 years after the lost bag, Harbor Steps became involved in a legal case against a housing nonprofit called New Dawn Residences. New Dawn operated transitional apartments using public grants and private donations. For years, it had been praised for moving people from shelters into stable housing. Then residents reported missing deposits, unexplained fees, and threats of eviction. A volunteer accountant found irregularities. The executive director, Candace Rowe, had transferred grant funds into consulting companies connected to relatives. She also charged residents cash fees not allowed under program rules. Some residents lost housing after questioning statements. Harbor Steps helped connect them with legal representation. I attended the first major hearing because our organization had provided records and emergency support. The courtroom was crowded. Residents sat with advocates. Reporters filled the back row. I was reviewing notes when a man at the front stood to address the judge. He wore a dark suit. His hair was shorter, his beard neatly trimmed. His voice was calm. He introduced himself as Samuel Reed, senior staff attorney for the Northwest Housing Justice Project. I looked up. The decade disappeared. The eyes were the same. So was the scar near his left temple I had noticed beneath the pharmacy awning. Samuel explained that New Dawn had required residents to sign incomplete forms, withheld receipts, and used the threat of homelessness to prevent complaints. He did not speak dramatically. He made the facts difficult to escape. When court adjourned, I remained seated. Part of me feared I was wrong. Then Samuel turned. Our eyes met. Recognition moved across his face slowly. "The bag," he said. I stood. "You remember? It was raining." We both laughed, though nothing was funny. I said, "I looked for you." "For how long?" The question was not accusing. It still exposed me. "A few months," he nodded. "That is longer than most people look." I asked what happened after that night. He glanced at the clients waiting nearby. "Not here." We exchanged numbers. 2 weeks passed before he called. We met at a diner near the courthouse. Samuel was 57. He had been 47 when he returned my bag. I had assumed he was older because hardship had changed his face. He told me his story in pieces. Before homelessness, Samuel had been a public defender in Spokane. He had a wife named Julia and a daughter, Hannah. His life collapsed over 4 years. First, Hannah died at 19 after taking a counterfeit pill containing fentanyl. Samuel and Julia grieved differently. He became consumed with the criminal case and angry at everyone involved. Julia withdrew. Their marriage ended. Samuel began drinking. He missed court deadlines. A judge reported him. He entered treatment, relapsed, and eventually lost his law license. Medical bills, divorce costs, and unemployment emptied his savings. He lived in his car until it was repossessed, then shelters, then the street. I listened without interrupting. At last I asked, "Why did you return the bag?" He looked surprised. "Because it was yours." "You had nothing. I had choices." That answer corrected me again. Homelessness had taken shelter, privacy, safety, and status. It had not taken his ability to decide who he was. He said, the bag frightened him. $6,000 could have paid for a room, food, and transportation. The laptop could have been sold. For several minutes, he considered keeping the cash. That honesty mattered. Then he saw a photograph in my passport wallet. Ethan and me at a baseball game. He thought of Hannah. "I did not want another parent's worst day attached to one of mine," he said. The line stayed with me. I asked how he rebuilt his life. A shelter caseworker helped him enter long-term treatment. He found work in a warehouse, then as a legal assistant for a nonprofit willing to consider his past. He petitioned for reinstatement to the bar after years of sobriety, supervision, and documented service. The process was not quick. It took nearly 6 years. He did not transform from homelessness to courtroom success through one kind act. He worked, relapsed once, returned to treatment, completed requirements, and rebuilt trust slowly. "That is less cinematic," he said. "It is more believable." He smiled. The midpoint revelation came when I mentioned Harbor Steps and New Dawn. Samuel's expression changed. He asked how long I had served on the board. 3 years. "Did you approve the referral partnership?" "What partnership?" Harbor Steps had referred clients to New Dawn for transitional housing for nearly 4 years. I knew that. Samuel asked whether our board had reviewed New Dawn's resident fee policies. I said staff handled program agreements. He looked concerned. Their director claims partner organizations knew residents were being charged supplemental fees. My stomach tightened. "We did not." "Are you sure?" I thought of board packets I had skimmed. Budgets, referral numbers, outcome reports. I had focused on fundraising and systems. I had trusted program leadership. That sounded uncomfortably familiar. Trust without questions. Samuel said New Dawn might attempt to shift responsibility onto referral partners. I called Nia immediately. Harbor Steps began an internal review. We discovered a former program manager had received complaints from residents 2 years earlier. She documented them. The complaints reached Nia but not the board. Nia confronted New Dawn informally. Candace Rowe claimed the fees were voluntary savings contributions held for residents. Nia accepted the explanation after receiving a spreadsheet. No independent verification occurred. Worse, Harbor Steps continued referrals because New Dawn had available units during a housing shortage. Nia feared ending the partnership would leave families in shelters. Compassion and scarcity had become excuses for weak oversight. I was furious. Then I remembered how often I had blamed employees for hiding problems in my company when leaders rewarded smooth reports. As a board member, I had praised placement numbers. I had asked how many people moved into housing. I had not asked how many complained after arrival. The stronger story was no longer Samuel's return. It was whether I would accept my organization's part in allowing harm. Harbor Steps hired an independent investigator. We notified funders and affected clients. Several board members objected. They feared reputational damage. One said, "We did not steal the money." I replied, "We sent people into a program after warnings and did not verify the answer. That did not make us equal to New Dawn. It made us responsible for our failures." He could not advise me personally while representing residents. Our relationship became formal during the case. He requested documents. We provided them. I recused myself from some board discussions because of our personal history. That disappointed me. It was necessary. Candace Rowe's attorneys argued Harbor Steps had approved the fees. They produced emails from the former program manager and Nia. The emails showed concern but no approval. Still, they showed knowledge. Residents felt betrayed by both organizations. At a community meeting, a woman named Felicia stood and said, "You all keep saying New Dawn lied to you. We told you first." The room became silent. She was right. Institutions often believe documents more than people harmed by the documents. Harbor Steps created a restitution fund for emergency deposits, legal costs, and moving expenses. We used reserves and special donations. I contributed personally. Samuel heard and said, "Do not turn your guilt into control." I became defensive. People need money. Yes. Then what is the problem? Make sure they decide what repair looks like. He was right again. The fund included a resident advisory group. Payments followed clear criteria shaped by those affected. My contribution did not purchase authority or forgiveness. The New Dawn case continued for more than a year. Candace eventually faced criminal charges related to grant fraud and theft. Her brother's consulting company returned part of the funds. Civil settlements compensated some residents, not fully. Legal justice rarely restores missed work, stress, damaged credit, or nights spent fearing eviction. Harbor Steps survived, but Nia resigned. She accepted responsibility for failing to escalate complaints. I did not want her to leave. Some staff did. Others believed leadership change was necessary. Nia said, "Intent is not the only measure of harm." That was true. The board also changed. 3 members resigned. We added 2 people with lived experience of homelessness and 1 former client. I stepped down as chair and remained only long enough to support transition. Power should not become permanent because someone believes they are helpful. During those months, Samuel and I became friends. Slowly. We drank coffee after hearings, walked near the waterfront, talked about grief, work, and the versions of ourselves we regretted. He asked about the leather bag. I still owned it. The handle had been repaired twice. "Why keep it?" he asked. "Because you returned it. That seems like a lot of pressure for luggage." I laughed. He had a dry humor I had not seen in the rain. I asked whether he stayed sober. Yes. He attended meetings, had a sponsor, avoided certain situations. He did not present recovery as a completed chapter. It was daily structure. I admired that. Then, admiration became affection. That frightened both of us. I was 58. Samuel was 57. Neither of us wanted to become someone else's rescue story. He said, "You met me at the worst point of my life. I met you during one honest decision. That does not tell you everything. I know." I told him he also knew me during a bad period. Society forgives flaws faster when they occur indoors. That sentence changed how I thought about respectability. We began dating after the New Dawn case ended, and after an ethics attorney confirmed no professional conflict remained. Ethan reacted cautiously. He knew the story of the bag. For years, I had told it as an inspiring moment. Now the man from the story had become real. Ethan said, "Are you dating him because you feel indebted?" "No. Is he dating you because you are financially secure?" "That is a fair question." I asked Samuel directly. He did not become offended. He said, "Your money makes some parts of life easier. It also makes me afraid people will think exactly that." We discussed finances early. Separate homes, separate accounts, clear expectations, no loans, no dramatic gifts. Trust is not insulted by practical questions when both people are allowed to answer. Ethan met Samuel at dinner. The first evening was awkward. Then Samuel asked about Ethan's work in sound engineering. They argued about live music acoustics for an hour. Afterward, Ethan said, "He does not act like someone who wants anything from you." I replied, "He wants things. Everyone does. The question is whether he tells the truth about them." I had learned something. Samuel wanted companionship, respect, and a life not permanently defined by homelessness or addiction. I wanted the same kind of freedom from my past. The stronger final revelation came 2 years after we reunited. Samuel received a box from a former shelter employee who was retiring. The shelter had stored unclaimed documents from the period when he lived there. Inside were old legal papers, letters, and a small notebook. One page contained my name and Mark's old phone number. Below it was another note. Laura Bennett Crestwell Hotels possible event contract. I asked what it meant. Samuel looked embarrassed. The night he returned my bag, he had opened the contract, not to steal information, to find contact details. He read enough to understand its importance. Months later, while working in the warehouse and trying to rebuild his life, he saw a newspaper article about Bennett and Lane winning the Crestwell account. He knew I had succeeded. He also knew where my company was. "You could have contacted me." "Yes." "Why didn't you?" "Because I did not want to become the homeless man you helped." "But I wanted to help." "I know." He had kept my name for years. Not because he planned to ask for money, because the bag represented a decision he wanted to remember. During relapse urges, he looked at the note. He told himself he had once possessed $6,000 that was not his and returned it. That night became evidence, he said. Of what? That I was still someone I could rebuild. I began crying. For 10 years, I had thought Samuel returned my bag and disappeared from my life. In reality, the encounter remained with both of us. I used it to tell myself honesty existed in unexpected places. He used it to remember honesty still existed inside him. The final confrontation was not between us. It happened at a fundraiser honoring housing advocates. The organizers wanted to tell our story publicly. A wealthy businesswoman loses a bag. A homeless man returns it. Years later, he becomes an attorney, and they reunite. The event director called it perfect. Samuel refused. She did not understand. It will inspire donors. He said, it turns homelessness into the dramatic middle of my life and her money into the measure of my honesty. The director asked me to persuade him. I declined. Then I did something I would not have done 10 years earlier. I asked Samuel what version, if any, he wanted shared. He agreed to speak about recovery, legal reinstatement, and resident rights. He mentioned the bag only briefly. He said, "One honest decision did not save me, but it reminded me I was capable of another one the next day." The room became quiet. That was less cinematic than the fundraiser wanted. It was more useful. I also spoke. I admitted my first reaction had been suspicion. I admitted I offered money because I wanted to turn discomfort into a completed transaction. Then I connected that failure to harbor steps, ignoring residents while trusting an organization's spreadsheet. The same bias appeared in different clothes. We believe people with status before people without it. We trust systems before testimony. We call one person credible and another complicated. The audience did not receive a simple miracle. They received responsibility. Samuel and I married 3 years later. Small ceremony. No story sold to newspapers. Ethan stood beside me. Samuel's sister attended. Julia, his former wife, sent a kind note but did not come. Their shared grief remained private. Hannah's photograph sat near the front. So did a photograph of my parents and one of Ethan as a child. We did not pretend our lives began when we met. We joined what remained. Marriage in our 60s has practical realities. Health screenings, retirement accounts, recovery routines, different sleep habits. Samuel still wakes early. I still treat every dinner like an event timeline if guests are coming. He reminds me not everything requires a backup plan. I remind him appointments belong on calendars. We argue. We apologize. No one rescues anyone. That was a rule we said aloud. I sold the leather bag at a charity auction after our wedding. For years, I believed I would keep it forever. Then Samuel said, "You are allowed to remember without preserving the object." The auction supported legal services for people facing eviction. The buyer paid far more than the bag was worth because they knew the story. I worried that was exactly the sentimental transaction Samuel disliked. He said, "At least the transaction is honest." Fair enough. I am 62 now. Samuel is 61. He continues housing law work part-time and mentors attorneys returning after addiction or discipline. I advise nonprofits on governance and financial controls. I ask different questions than I once did. Not only how much money moved. Who complained? Who was believed? Who benefits from silence? What happens to someone who raises a concern? Those questions reveal the health of an organization more accurately than polished reports. Harbor Steps recovered. Trust slowly. Not completely. Some former clients never returned. They had the right not to. The new board publishes complaint data and uses resident reviewers for housing partnerships. No system becomes pure. It can become more accountable. People still ask whether meeting Samuel again felt like fate. I do not know. Seattle is large. Courtrooms are specific. Our paths crossing after 10 years was unlikely, but calling it fate can hide the choices in between. Samuel chose recovery repeatedly. He completed treatment, worked jobs beneath his old qualifications, faced the licensing board, served clients. I sold a company, faced my failures as a mother and leader, joined an organization, stayed when oversight exposed me. We became people capable of recognizing each other again. Chance created the meeting. Choices created what followed. The homeless man returned my lost bag. For years, I believed the story proved character can survive poverty. That was true, but incomplete. Character is not a possession some people keep and others lose. It is built through decisions made under pressure, then tested by the next pressure. Samuel almost kept the money. He returned it. I almost treated him like a charity project. He refused. Harbor Steps almost protected its reputation. Residents forced us toward truth. I almost made our reunion into redemption for my guilt. Samuel insisted on equality. None of us was perfect at the moment that mattered. We became more honest because the moment demanded a choice. The bag contained my passport, computer, money, and contract. I thought Samuel returned my future. 10 years later, I understood he returned something else. He returned evidence that my first judgment was wrong, that a person standing in rain with no address could possess more integrity than the people inside the station who dismissed him. And when I saw him again, he returned another lesson. It is not proof they no longer need help, or that suffering was meaningful, or that justice will reward them. Sometimes it is simply one decision, then another, then enough decisions to build a life. That is what Samuel did. That is what I had to learn to do too.